Hello everyone, it's John here, John Cann. I'm presenting today's webinar to you on tracing government employees. Welcome aboard. I'm going to be trying to give you a really good overview of this subject and it's now at an exciting time because as you can see from the opening screen, we've got the new website rolled out and it is our new adventure, and I'm going to be trying to unlock some of the potential of this new way of finding information so you can use it in your research. So let's begin our journey, and I wish you good luck with your research. Now, this is going to be how I plan the webinar for today. At first, I'm just going to ask the obvious question, where would I start? And we're going to answer that question. I'm going to give you some overview-y kind of information, things that you can use once the webinar is over, both to recap, but also to get started and look for options. It's very powerful. In phase 2, Act 2, I'm going to then look at, well, what do I do to actually find things for my research? In part 3, I'm going to then look at employer records, and something that a person who hasn't been doing preparation in how to look at career records can easily overlook. These are the harder to find but available records that we have. And finally, I'm going to leave most of the examples until the last part of the webinar because I'm going to show you them in one group and you can see the types of records that we have and the wide variety that we have on this subject. So that's the plan. Are we ready? Let's go. Now, I'm showcasing in the webinar today as a side thing a lot of photographs. I found them all in our on our website using words like staff and employee. Now, I don't want to oversell that. They don't come with names attached, so it's in the eyes of the beholder. But I just couldn't resist for today's webinar. So here's part 1. Where do I start? It's a logical question. These are the kinds of records that are available for your research. The first one is departmental records. Now we have records of government agencies, and those agencies quite often would keep their own staffing records, and these are the predictable patterns that they seem to follow. We have departmental correspondence and minutes, we have registers of employees, we have salary registers, we have employment history cards. That's one of the most popular ones to find because it's so full of information. And for very senior public servants, it is possible to find personnel files in our collection. We have general public servant records, blue books, which I will talk at length about later on, and records of the Public Service Board. And that's sort of like an overview of the whole of the public service. We have photographs, and we have publications. Now, the most likely publications to help you with employee records would be government gazettes, annual reports, and gazettes of each of the individual departments. So these are the main series of options that you will find, and the rest of my webinar today, I'll be showing you how to activate these options in your research. Access. Now, this is an advanced skill, so be warned, it's not for everyone, but I think my view of a webinar today is to give you the tools that you can decide to use. So this is what we do when we have to look at access. Now, access is very important because under the State Records Act, everything is closed for 30 years, but each of the government agencies can set periods of time based upon their own individual needs. And now what it means when it comes to government employees is that everyone, not everyone, but many different agencies chose different lengths of time, and it can vary very widely. So let's have a look. If you want to know, well, is my record going to be open? It's from the 60s. Well, this is how you do it. This is how I would do it if you asked me on the phone or over the desk. Now, first, I would go to Research A to Z. It's one of the main ways to go into our collection and find information, just find information. I would click on Access Directions. I would then go to the Register of Access Directions. The rest of this page is not designed for the average historian or family historian, but this one is what I want to show you. Once you get here, you can look down the page, and down the bottom, Access Directions by Public Office, and then we go into a list. Now, everyone's research is different, so I can't cater for your individual needs at this stage. So I've just picked one near the top for no particular reason, and it's Aging, Disability and Home Care. Now, when I click on that link, that little red writing there, it takes us through to a listing of this sort. Now, what this means is if something is closed, it means it's closed beyond the 30-year threshold, and you can see the first series with a description of what it is closed for 110 years. They're client medical records. We're not interested in that. If you look at the second one down, 1153, it says staff personnel records, excluding summary records such as history cards. That means that if there's any sort of personnel file, it's closed, but it does say excluding summary records such as history cards. So if there's a history card on that person, it would still be open. The next one down, staff summary records, they've mentioned it now. It's closed for 50 years. So do you see what I'm doing? I'm just reading it. And once I know what the record is that I want to interpret, I can see how long it's closed for. And we'll look at now, we'll go up a level. And if you look at it across the breadth of government, there really is a wide variety of access periods. And that's one of the reasons that I made this a focus of this part of the webinar. So just to give you a sense of, I see what he means. This is just a series of 3 examples chosen only because they vary in length. One is the police force. Their records are closed for 30 years from an individual's exit from the service. So that means the vast majority of history is open. We've got public works, personnel records. It doesn't itemize whether they've left service or not. They're all closed for 50 years. And that would mean that we would mask anything in that 50 years or close the record completely. The third one is Department of Health. And as you can see, they've closed records for 100 years. They really know how to close a record, don't they? So it does vary by department. Now, you don't have to memorize this. You don't even have to master it, and you don't even have to use it. Because if you talk to an archivist, such as myself on the phone or by email or over the desk, we can give you this kind of advice quite comfortably and very, very casually. But I am letting you know that these are some of the pitfalls of this type of research. And if you're keen to get ahead in your own research and have a bit of control, this is the sort of thing that I would do. So which brings me now to the best top view finding information tool we have, which is Research A to Z. Now, you would have used it in your research by now, and if not, I'm very proud to be the person to introduce it to you. You can see 2 links on the screen. One's there, and one's below the search bar down below, and it takes you through to this screen. Now, this is where everyone's research diverges, okay? But because we're all still talking government employees, I'm going to hold you a bit longer. Now, you can look down that page for different subjects, obviously, and I'm going to click on P for professions and occupations. That's probably the really best way to get into this kind of thing if you're not sure what you're looking for. There it is. I'm going to click on professions and occupations, and it takes me through to a screen. Now, this is a point where everyone's interests are going to be in different places. We've got all sorts of occupations here, and if you listen to my previous webinar on occupations, I did actually mention this at quite length because there's so many different things here. You can just see on the screen now, dentists, physiotherapists, and so forth. Now, for public government employees, it's a pretty narrow range. I'm now going to focus in on just what we need at this webinar. I'm showing you the screen because I'm encouraging you to have a look at a later time. I'm going to public servants, so I think that's one of the best places to start. And once we get there, what you get for your efforts is you'll get a guide on what sort of records are considered the best records on that subject. If there's any indexes attached, you can click on that link and go to the indexes. And so it's really a kit. You can go here and you can just browse it, and very quickly you can become fairly expert in what you're doing long after this webinar is over. Colonial Secretary comes up very quickly, and it does on probably most of the guides because it is one of the most powerful and flexibly powerful records that we have. Because if you would think about it just logically, anybody who was writing to the government or wanted something from the government at any time in the history up to 1982, but certainly in the previous century, would be writing to the Colonial Secretary. That was the process. And think about it. If they wanted to get a job with the government, they would write to the Colonial Secretary. If they were on a list of people who had just been employed by the government, they would probably be on a list to the Colonial Secretary. You see where I'm going with this? This is actually a really good one-stop shop for finding information on individuals that you may be researching. And it would work equally well for a historian writing a book or preparing a movie, or someone who's just doing their family history and has a few leads they want to follow up. Now, on the subject of government employees, we'll go down further because it's an important piece of work here. The next thing down is public service lists. What's interesting is that the public service lists were started as a returns of colony, and it was really, I've read some of the earlier ones, and it's really just like a huge statistical handbook on what the colony is doing for a year. But what's interesting is about the fourth or fifth part going through the whole document is lists of employees and government employees, and so it is a very powerful tool for us. Now, back in the day, you would have had to have gone through microfiche in our reading room for those, but they are now fully available on Ancestry and can be searched there. And because of the powers of the modern computer, we can search for names in that kind of tool, which makes them very easy to find. They evolve into a more modern name, which is public service lists, and then they've sort of become known as the blue books. I don't know if you've come across that term before. Whenever I mention the blue books, I always show that, look, have a look, they're really blue. And so that's how they got their nickname. And if you go through our collection, that's what they look like. Now, you're not going to probably, unless you're on one of the tours of the archive, you're not going to get to see one in real life, but you can access the information. And here's just a sample page for you from 1960. And as you can see, for the State Public Library of New South Wales, it tells you all the key individuals who are employed there, down to grade 1 librarians, as you can see down the bottom there. So that's actually a really good list of the people employed in that one agency, and it gives you an example of what you can access on Ancestry using the government public service lists. It's a fundamental tool for researching government employees. That's why it's in part 1. Now we go down a little bit further. It mentions another one that is, I think, underutilized in the reading room, just as an observer on the counter, and that is employee history cards. We have this series, because it's not indexed online, it does make it seem a little bit like it's less in the public domain. And if I can give you one thing today, because it'll be a subtext through a lot of the rest of the webinar, is that I consider an archive to be like an iceberg. You can see what's on the surface because that's what's indexed online or what's easily available on Ancestry and so forth. But an archive is full of very valuable resources that are below that level, which are now more accessible than ever with our new website. And so now you can go hunting below that waterline and find these other things. Now, this is one of the more valuable ones and easy to explain ones, because I'm going to show you an example from the history cards right now. And as you can see, it is like all history cards essentially do the same job. They will give you the basic details of the person and a date of birth. So right away, you can have confirmation that it is your person. How often is that a hard thing to do in other cases? It tells you when they were employed. Sometimes I find with people doing research, they generally speaking have an idea when they were employed. So you know it's going to be your person. And once you're into the story, it'll then give you a series of actions that have been happened upon that person's record. So for example, their salary increases, any allowances, in this case, any allowances, there'll be remarks on the right-hand side. Sometimes you'll find a side note. It might be they resigned because they're getting married or they're going to have babies, or it could be that they've career change and so forth. And you can see these sorts of things on the right-hand side. On this one in particular, you can see that the person resigned in 1931. So these sorts of history records are very, very valuable in terms of creating a history of your person, because think about it, you know what they were earning and probably where they were working. You now know, and you know with confidence it's your person. You're really well and truly into your research on that person, and it fleshes out a lot of details automatically and straightforwardly for you. So when it comes to history cards or personnel cards, they are some of the most valuable records for a family history or for history on individuals that you can find in the archive. How to find records. So now we're going to switch gear. I've started with an overview where I showed you what kinds of things we're going to be finding, and now I'm going to really dig in and just imagine I'm like you and I'm showing you like I'm with you at the computer and looking over your shoulder and giving you directions on, well, you could try this, you could try that. And always keep in mind that because I'm doing a webinar, I'm trying to cater for everybody all at once. So I hope the examples will work for you. Now we're going to be using collection search, which is a new version of the tool that we've had in place for so long, because it now searches indexes seamlessly with the rest of our collection, and it organizes information very intelligently so that you can do search. You can, a new person, if I've got any new people in the audience, you're going to get the tools in a minute. You can be finding records after the webinar. It's very simple and very logical. And if anyone gets ever stuck, always go back to Research A to Z to find out more information. So let's begin. Enough. Option 1, search using name. Obvious place to start. The new collection search has been designed to work this way. So we're going to put a name in, John Arrowsmith, and we get a series of results. Now let's take a look at the results we've got, which is always the next step. I can see divorce papers, primary applications, there's a probate there, there's another probate, there's another probate. Death's very common, happens to most people, I think. Now, that you can see now we're getting results. This is always going to be interesting to the Arrowsmith family, but for today's purposes, we want to filter it out and get down to what we really want. So now that means we have to use the tweak my results section on the right-hand side. Now, if you look over there right now, you can see that I can sort it out by different things. I can sort it out by, for example, just index results. Okay, if I click on that index result, it'll limit to things that are just in our indexes, which is what I want to do this time because I think he's going to be in one of the indexes. I notice down there below there's a listing of the indexes, and I'm actually interested in that first one, the Botanic Gardens and Government Domains. So you see I have 2 different entry points to filter the information out to just what I want. So in this case, because I'm going slow and gentle for you, I'm going to have a look at the Botanic Gardens, and it turns out there's one result, and it's my man, John Arrowsmith. Now, something I think you need to always do is to remember to click on the link. You want to go one step further than just having the name in front of you, because there's no information at the moment what you do with it. You click on it, you go through to this, which is the replace the old item page, and you'll see that now we have lots of information. Now, I would recommend always writing down citations. The reason is because many a researcher, particularly when they're not experienced, will lose track of what they've looked at or lose track of what they want to see, and it can be very difficult to backtrack. It can be monumentally difficult. So I strongly recommend that you always write down your citations. We've got options now to tag things like that, but I'll leave that for another webinar on how to do that kind of thing. Today's focus is on finding records of the government employees. So this is an option that I could come into the reading room and have a look. You can see that it's on reel. Now, something very fundamental you need to learn about an archive is that we're always worried about keeping that record in good condition for future generations. So that means once it's been copied to reel or onto a computer, the original in general will not be issued. So in this case, that reel 1705, you'd have to come into the reading room to have a look at it. In this case. Now, for people who may be living in long distance, I don't want you to feel like I just left you out. There's always options for making things happen from a distance. We are always putting records online as we can, but it will take time. There's also the option to go with a professional researcher because they come here routinely and they can do extra research on your behalf. And in general, there are guides on our website for how to find one, and the Society of Australian Journalists is one option for looking for a researcher. So you can access information from wherever you are, including our international people online today. G'day, mate. Okay, that's the format of the item. It's a reel. We'll move on. The sort of things that you will find in there are all sorts of things. Police service registers are in those indexes, school teacher roles, railway employment records, and so forth. And as you can see, most of those have a copy service attached, which means you can order a copy from that previous page. Now we're going to go with option 2 today. Option 2 is we're going to look at online indexes, and you could argue, you've seen how I search for a name in collection search and it worked perfectly well, particularly when I was able to filter. You could argue, well, do you really need online indexes? And my answer to that person is, it's just a tool in the box and you don't need it necessarily, or you can use it the way I'm about to show you. It's simply a tool in the box. There may be a situation where you'd prefer to use it. So this is what I would do if that was your personality or your interest. I'd go to online indexes. You can see there's a list of them. I'm going now to professions and occupations. And as we go in there, I can see all the indexes that are for those sorts of things. Now, the reason I think this might actually still intrigue some people is because here I can actually see a list of what we have indexed. Whereas on the previous screen, in a sense, you're assuming it's all there. So I think information is power. I think sometimes you're going to want to see what's here. This is the way you would check. Now, the first index is the one we're interested in. We're going in again. And this is one of the improvements that always makes me smile because I'm putting in Virgil Roberts on the right-hand side there, and you get the result instantly. Yes, wow. Anyway, you can see I've got the results on the example screen there now. We've got the name there, Virgil Roberts. We've got his date of birth, which is the way I confirm it's my Virgil and not someone else's. We've got his date of employment. That's now information I can use. We have the citation, same as before, by the way. That's not the point of this, this part of the talk. And then finally, the details. Always click on the details. Okay, you go through to this screen again, same screen as before, enough said. Oh, it's a similar, different person, but yeah, enough said. Same reel, by the way. Now, this is his particular record once we get through to it in the reading room. And I heard you. It's a messy, plugged document, isn't it? Now, I actually find that really fascinating in myself because it's a working document. It's not something where they've typed it up at the end of the person's career so that the family historian can pick it up and then have the history. It's actually a working document where they're adding to his record as time passes. And you can see there are parts where they had to squeeze it all in, and there are parts where they had more space. And I find that kind of thing interesting because it tells me a bit about the things that are happening on the screen. Now, as you can see here, I won't go too much into the details because there's so many I can show you, and I'd rather show you a large number than look at the individual details. But you can see here, essential information is on screen. He's entered on duty in 1900, 9th to the 3rd, 1900, and so forth. And then it goes through a series of events throughout his career. And also we've got a lady on the right-hand side as well. They've put in some government gazettes there and salary. So that for that family, that's going to be fascinating information. And if you're a family historian, if that is your angle, this kind of thing is like a huge leg up. It takes you to the results page right away. And for those of you doing a history of it and it involves individuals, it works just as well, of course. Which brings me to option 3. Now, we're going to be getting a little bit more sophisticated there now, so just get a little bit more comfortable in your chair. We're going to be looking at collection search and looking at now by government departments. And this is where there's so many government departments that I've decided not to focus on individual departments. I'm going to show you the big picture on how to search generally. It's actually quite simple, provided you can filter down, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So in this new environment, just write the word education. And as you can see, it worked. We've now got a series of things on screen which are useful to us. Portfolio and activity are generally high level. I'd be looking for things like series and agencies. Series are the records of the government agencies, and agencies are the government departments, and you can work out what they've got inside them. So in this case, what piques my interest is this one, the Education Gazette. That is something that is interesting to anyone who's doing research. You may find that you can find that information in the public service list, but if it turns out you can't, you can go here to something like a Gazette, as I've said it previously. Now, we're going to go further with that in a little bit of time, but I think I'll focus now on Colonial Secretaries Indexes, which is 4A. Now, online indexes, this is one where you do need to still go to online indexes, and in this case, Colonial Secretary, because this first index, this is not in collection search. Now, if I was to give you a reason, I think actually what I'll do is I'll show you. This is what you get through to. It's still designed as a HTML page, which is like a book. And for that reason, it's not a database and it hasn't been converted into a format that can go into collection search. So that means you need to know that it's there and go there on purpose. So that's my gift to you today for this webinar. This is how you use it. It's just a book, very simple. N for surname. Without going to James Nowland, he's my person of interest. He says here he's a government servant at Windsor, petition for mitigation of sentence. So what that tells me is that it's a convict who's been serving as a government servant and now would like a ticket of leave. Now, if we go to the actual letter, here it is. We zoom in just to get a little bit of a better view. You can see that the petitioner since his arrival has been in the constant employ of government at Windsor under the superintendence of Mr. Fitzgerald and presumes to hope that his general conduct has met his application. So there you go. So it tells you, because one of the beautiful things about Colonial Secretary is that when people write to the Colonial Secretary, in general they want something. And I always think of it as like a job interview where they're saying, notice two things. First is they say that the petitioner rather than me. So that's just the language of these things in the third person. But also, they're usually telling you something about themselves that's very personal and very important to them, and they give detail. In this case, we now know that he worked in the government employ at Windsor. I go straight to the blue books for this one, if it was me. Now down the bottom, I decided not to put an arrow on it. It's asking for a ticket of leave. So the ticket of leave is essentially like a parole where he gets to work while he's still a convict. The next one I'm going to show you is a different style of thing you will find in there. On list of government servants employed by James Portsmouth of Evan. And as you can see, it's a list. And this is very, very common that you will see government employee lists in Colonial Secretary's letters. And you can find them indexed by name in that first index. And I'll show you a little bit later on the later indexes. This one. Now this one is not online at the current time. You can find it in two places. One is in our reading room on the computers and also in microfiche, although that is not necessary anymore. You can also find it in local libraries in different places across the state and hopefully near where you are. And it's called the Joan Reese Index. You can see it on screen there, Joan R-E-E-S-E. She did the lion's share of the indexing. Her daughter took over towards the end. And it's indexed by name. The beautiful thing about the Joan Reese Index is she's not indexing from the original records, which can be very hit and miss in some cases. She's indexing from the records. And that means in almost every time, if you get a result, there's going to be something to see. And that for me in the reading room, when I'm supporting you, that's a really powerful tool because it means it should be there. And there we go. Of course, then we have to go and get it. So the indexes works pretty well, and it's designed to work by name. So you just put a name in and you will get results. But I wanted to show you that you can play with these sorts of things and use your common sense. So I'm going to actually look for the word staff just to see what happens for today's webinar. And you can see it does actually work. A few Staffordshire's, of course. I asked for that. But you can see down the bottom there, staff of charitable institutions of state children's. Interesting. That's a list of people who were employed by them at that time, 1895, I think. We've got military staff officer and so forth, permanent staff, volunteer, names of staff of asylum and so forth. Yeah, we're going to have a look at that one. I wanted to show you that this kind of research can work for you. Now, in the end, I went into the archive and I scanned this document for you just so you could see what kind of thing you can aim for in these kinds of search. And as you can see on this screen, there's it's the same as you would see on the public service list or one of the staff cards, because you get the name of the person, the role, the salary, remuneration, and the annual rate and so forth. So really, it's a really good snapshot of who was employed by the organisation at that time. Now, these kinds of records can be very hit and miss, but because of the power of Colonial Secretary, in general, they should be all those results should be in there. One of the interesting things about Joan Reese is that she would have indexed this as staff of Cullen Park, but not necessarily individuals because they're on a list. So it's things like lists where you can sometimes unlock the potential by looking for the agency and not the person. Very neat, isn't it? On a second search, I'm now going, I decided not to go that far, sorry. So now I'm going to pause for a moment. We're going to get deeper now into how to search for employer records. Now, when I did that education search, I showed you that you can just type in a name of an agency, but we need to get a bit more sophisticated on how to do that properly. So this is the part where I'm going to do that. So we go back to the finding aids, the collection search, which is what we call it. We put in something, let's say public works. I chose it completely at random, although it is a very big organisation. I'm using the keyword salary just to show you what that will do. Yeah, other terms can be used. You can use employment, staff cards, staff registers. I'm going to use a variety today. They all work, and you'll get a bit of experience from today's webinar. Now, when you get through here, if you look carefully, they're all going to be, they should all be connected to the public works because it should be in the description, yeah? And also you will get anything that has those key terms. So this search has been a little bit messy in my opinion. I look down and I still find records that are relevant to me, registers of miscellaneous wages and wardens' clerks' salaries. I still don't know which agency that is, so you can click on the item view and have a look. I changed the term at the top, salary registers, and you can see, bingo, I'm getting a lot of hits. So what I'm teaching you is that the government is a very predictable organisation. They do predictable things, and you can search down these predictable lines and bring up results that are relevant to you in your particular situation. And so what you would do when you get to this point is you can go to the right-hand side and search by agency and choose the agency you want to search by, and that would filter it down to just that agency. You can also just browse down and see if there's any agencies in the descriptions. because quite often they are on our end in their back room. So if I click on that one as an example, down the bottom is the creating agency, which is number 44 and 45. Let's not worry about the 44 and 45. Basically, it's Lands and Public Works that are the controlling agency for this particular salary registers. So if I go back, I now know that we have salary registers for that Lands and Public Works for 56 to 95 right here in those two volumes. And that's an example of how you find records that are not indexed online on our website. They're not indexed on Ancestry, but we do have them. And let's think of that as the ice that's below the level of the water. You can find those things now very easily, and not by being an expert either. Now here's an example of the record once you get through to the results. Same series, and it's the same kind of thing. I'm trying not to be repetitive and just highlighting the major things, but you've got the locations, you've got the office, you've got the salary. These are the kinds of things that create information you can use. Now I do notice in this case, it does have paper numbers on the right-hand side. My experience has been that will not generally go through to records that you can actually access, but every story will be different. And what I'd be curious about in this case, if this was my person of interest, is do we hold correspondence of the Department of Lands and Public Works? And I could go back and just look for Department of Lands, Public Works correspondence. And if the answer is yes, then the answer is possibly you can follow that lead down. And it will work. It will work. I don't want to scare you in terms of, you can always come back and review this webinar, but it will work for you. Now we'll go back to the base, to the main page, and we're going to have another look, just the word staff. One word is probably not the right way to search. I'm just doing this to give you some experience. You can see that it worked in terms of bringing up records relevant to us. We've got staff at the top, we've got personnel staff branch number 2, we've got staff and salaries branch of the Premier's department, we've got staff files. So these are the kinds of records that you can't find if they're not indexed until now. Now remember, the key to it is you want to filter it in a way that works for you. If you're just curious, click on them, have a look, or go straight to the right-hand side and click on agency, and it'll then filter it down to the agency. Now, of course, I have to at least acknowledge there's going to be a lot of agencies. In this case, 672. The way we describe records is whoever creates the record is known as an agency. And that means, for example, Department of Education is an agency, but so are each of the schools that create records. So that's a small muddying factor, but by filtering down by agency, you can search very effectively. And you can also put at the top, if you were, for example, were looking for a school teacher at one school, you could write Homebush Boys High School. Excuse me, I digress. I'm thinking in terms of if I wanted to look at records of one school, I would go that way. When it comes to staffing, it's departmental level, so that wouldn't work for that search. But it would work if you wanted to focus in on a school, just for the side note. Moving on. Series is a very powerful way to go as well. The reason I like it in my own searching for the sort of jobs I do is because every series is an actionable thing. You can use any series in our collection. If you find an agency, you found thousands and thousands of options. But if you click on a series, it's something I can use. I can go and look at. I can find. And so it is actually a very powerful way just to go straight to the business end. And the way our series are written, they will generally speaking have the agency attached, so you can work it out pretty quickly. Now in this case, I've just gone a little bit further to give you experience. Do you see the variety of records, annual reports, staff attendance book, staff development files, staff files? There, these records are available to you in the reading room in the vast majority of cases. I don't want to go too much further down this search, except to say, have a go. Now, like most search engines, even Google, it's usually better to combine two terms. So I recommend staff and register, or staff and employment cards, that kind of thing, where you put a term, one term with another until you find the right term for that agency. Yeah, now we're finding agencies, staff and salaries branch of the Premier's department. Notice it's very recent. Records are closed for 30 years in all cases, just be warned. And in some cases longer, so just be warned. But if ever you're confused about access, just ring us. We can help you with that. Oh, on the right-hand side, this will probably help you in other searches more than this one today. If you click on the term digitally available, you go through to something you can see online. In this case, it's bound to be photographs. Now, as you can see, I used a fair number of photographs for today's webinar as a side note. my frustration with photographs is they're so beautiful, so powerful, but they generally speaking don't work for the individual because nobody writes the name on the photograph. Don't get me started. Now, on the first one there, I just couldn't resist having a click on that when I was preparing for today's webinar. So let's have a look. And you notice when you go through, you can see there are thumbnails. It gives you the content date range, photographs, that's the whole series. But I'm going to click on that first one because I'm really curious why we've got 2 tennis players. And it turns out 1938 tennis championships. And if you go have a closer look, it's for the MS board. And their championship in 1938. So maritime services. So yeah. Now, who are they? I don't know. And I would like to know. But if there's someone out there who is in there or knows someone who knows someone in there, that might be a really, really powerful thing for you. But be warned, photographs are not designed for the family historian. It's one of the great missed opportunities of the past. I hope you put your names on photographs today. We'll have another look with a power term, personnel. And as you can see, personnel is not quite as powerful as I think employment or staff. Or history card. A history card is actually a good one as well, but in this case it will take you through to personnel divisions, and if you're a power researcher who wants to really drill down, that's how you would do it. This is what archivists do when we're doing research for talks or for exhibitions and so forth. We'll go to the top of the agency and then drill down. What do they have? What can I use? What's useful to me? In your case, you're looking for simple things: history cards, salary registers, and anything else that might be interesting. Something that I didn't use as an example, just because I moved to other examples, is that you can find all sorts of side things like handbooks for prison staff, rules of prison staff. These are the kinds of things that are actually here, and you can go and have a look. And if your person was in corrections and you found a handbook of rules they followed, it could be quite an intriguing way at looking at the way they lived. And some of them, and in terms of being in the past, can be a culture that you and I simply have never experienced. So let's move back to the general direction of my webinar, Teacher Personnel Division. We can look down the bottom and see what they have. I'm now going to use staff cards. That's one of the most powerful search terms for what you and I are interested in today. And look what we get, loads of results. Remember, if you want to focus in on a particular agency, you go down to the series by agency and pick the agency you want to work with. And you'll notice there, RNCG. Now that is actually brand new on the website. That's the stuff that's below the waterline, because that's our collection that hasn't been put into the main search engine until now, and it's now available. So you could call those recently available records, and I imagine they wouldn't have been looked at very often. So if you're curious about any of those, click on them directly, and you can see what agency they're for. I noticed that the agency search isn't working for this one, only 3. So I would probably flick up to the series if it was me, and then go into them and have a look at each one. There's only 34, and it would work. Employee history cards is a very common term, and as you can see, it works. It brings up enormous numbers of different sorts of records. Yeah. So we go through to this one. You notice there that it's in 135 boxes. So what that tells me is that I would have to come in and have a look at what's in those boxes. Now, if you're from a distance, don't feel left out, because if I suggest you go to a professional researcher, it's not an enormous amount of work to do this kind of research. Any sort of research into government employees would be perhaps 2 or 3 steps. 2 or 3 different types of things that they would do. They look for a staff card, they might look for a salary register, and then possibly there's something I can't predict. So you get 2 or 3 steps and you've done the whole research, and the outcome is incredible. This is the Public Service Board, gives you a bit of a history of it, you don't need it. And here's an example of the employee history cards of the Premier's Department. And as you can see, it fits the general profile of all the other ones. It gives you the role, what they were doing, it gives you the pay, it gives you allowances, and it gives you any sort of remarks that are relevant to that person. It says one there is confirmed in the Gazette, payment of clothing allowance, and so forth. I'm pausing just so you can take it in a little bit. Now, I'm confident that if you ever get through to a salary card or an employee history card, you've got pay dirt. And it's just a question of how useful is it for your research. But from my point of view, if I'm doing family history and I can see a listing of where they were every couple of years and what their salary was, I feel like I'm halfway there. maybe no further, 3/4 there. So good luck in your research. And one of the great things about the New South Wales government is they're meticulous with record keeping, and so hopefully you'll be successful in your search. Now, I've done a little bit of searching by key terms, but I thought I'd just let you know, I'm encouraging you to play with this, because I know that if you play a few wrong terms, you're going to start getting results that are quite powerful. I want you to know that it works this way. So a teacher is a job that we know, they're all government employees. So what would happen if I put the word teacher in? Oh, here it is. Here's the result. And if you look through Teacher Housing Authority, I had no idea. Personnel Division, teacher career cards. Yep, bingo. Third one down, teacher career cards, very similar to what you've just seen. We've also got leave cards. Very few people ever look at those. And I'm not sure, I'll leave it with you if you think that might be interesting when they took leave and why. Teacher training files. To my knowledge, they don't get looked at very often. And I'm a person who likes history, so whenever I find out the facts of a matter, I like to know the background to the facts. So I'd be curious about those training files if I had someone who was teaching in those periods. So let's go back to the one that is the most important one for us, teacher career cards. You have a thumbnail there of an example which gives you the ability, unless you forget to expand it on your screen at the webinar, to have a look at what it looks like. Okay, so you can have a look there. Another option is Trainway staff registers. Okay, takes us through. So I've now combined something to do with the tramway and used some of the key terms of earlier in the webinar. And here's an example. Date of previous appointment, rate of pay. They certainly scribbled in very tightly, didn't they? And didn't use all this space. But that in itself tells me something. One of the things I can give you for background is that the tramways merged with railways in one period, then demerged again. So perhaps times changed and they went to a different record keeping system, who knows. Something that you can look at if you're finding it difficult to find your person working for the government is annual reports. They will generally speaking have results, and this is what I would do. I'd use the term annual reports. In preparing this example for you, I found it best to have annual report and then an agency, because let's face it, annual reports are very common. And reports of the Hawkesbury Agricultural College. We go in, and here's the actual example. I went to into the system and found it for you, into the archives. And as you can see, it's like any annual report. It's going to have loads of information about the agency. It could be of use to you if you know that your person worked there. Have a look down there. There's reports of officers, page 106. And as you go through, officers and staff, a listing, combined with information from those different parts, so things like farm foreman. This is what I'm encouraging you to be aware of, because you never know what you find until you look. And although you and we can sit here and think, well, I know what's in an annual report, I can probably guess, and I agree with you actually, that's what I think. In general, you can always be surprised by the information you can draw from these. For example, with this one, I was surprised to see so much information on each of the jobs in the agency. It was a real find. And that's the kind of thing that can be there. Something I've learned with working in the archive for a reasonable number of years now is that oftentimes you can draw out information that you didn't know that you were going to see. So it's always worth having a look. So you can search for gazettes in that way, in this way. Education Gazette 936 takes us through and it finds it. Now, something I want to tell you, this worked in this example, but everything comes down to how that particular thing has been described in our back room in the archival end. And it does follow very predictable patterns that are working for my webinar today. But if you find that you are getting too much information, put in more. And if you find you're not getting enough, put in less. Okay, so if you put in less information, so for example, if I took off 36, I might get the right results. In this case, it's perfect for the example I'm using. So let's have a look at it. And as you can see, front and center, transfers and appointments of inspectors. And you can see it goes right down the page as well. So I'm broadening your capabilities now. I'm showing you the main line is to look for something like a career card, and that will actually make lots of people very content. But if you want to keep searching, and if you want to come into the reading room or send a researcher, there is actually more to find, but it will vary in every case, like all research. We know that, don't we? One of the things interesting about government gazettes is they're now digitised on Trove. And they're a very powerful tool because they search government gazettes. You can search it there, see? And you put in something like a name. It is best to put date ranges because it can get a very messy search. You can get too many results. So I would recommend always using search ranges, and it takes you through, in this case, to an appointment. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that the government gazettes would often at times have appointments of people, and also in certain periods they'll give you whole lists of whole departments right up until approximately World War II. That begins to change. So if you're searching before World War II, government gazettes are even more powerful than that. Public service lists we've already looked at. Okay, I've shown you that example. So now we'll move into, I'm dropping the idea of how to find things, because now I'm just going to show you the payoff. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that come forward in this research. What I think you're going to notice very quickly is they're all very similar, but with significant small differences. Now, in this case, it looks very similar to before. It's listing position, branch, annual salary, and so forth. I think what I'll do in this stage of the webinar, because we're right on schedule, is just browse. I'm just going to go through the examples with a smooth pace. I might stop and highlight something different. You notice that this one's smaller than the last one. It's Public Works, Register of Officers. If you were curious about search terms and I didn't go far enough, take a look at the ones that I found for you in the examples. Register of Officers worked for this. Salaried officers for railways. This is something that's been in our online index for some time, but it actually is a book, as you can see here, where they scribble in the information. And I don't know why, I just love seeing crossouts. It makes me wonder why they crossed that out. Now, we're not going into details for today's webinar, but that's the kind of question you can ask when you're doing your research. You might need a magnifying glass. Here's an example from Railways. Railways is one of the most significant employers in the state governments, probably still is, because of the huge number of employees all across the state in different locations. So for those of you who are interested in, say, a country location, this is a really good way to find your people of interest, and it will work for you very well. We actually have an ability, you can order a copy from us, so you can just be in a remote area and you can order a copy of this. And I didn't put it in as an example on our page, but go down to the bottom of the website and then look at copy services, and then go through and look for railway history cards, and you can order these from distance. The side note that's interesting about this particular record is that it is actually designed for the superannuation system inside railways. And you can see it gives all the normal detail and gives a lot of detail. But what's interesting is if they weren't in the superannuation system, they probably won't have a card. So I find when I'm helping people in the reading room that this is a hit and miss operation. It's more hit than miss, but it's not, I can't guarantee everybody a result. So that's why on page 3, it'll be the second, I chose 2 examples. I just wanted to give you a bit of experience. Oh, notice this person won an award. That's interesting. All right. For the person who's doing the research, they could go through those details and put some effort into the details. He's resigned, is it twice? Yeah. Interesting. So these things may look dry from first inspection, but it's the details where they start having an enormous amount of interest. Nominal role of Australian Imperial Forces. This is also railways. I believe this one's indexed online. Now this is the plan B. If you ever have problems with finding railway employees, every 3 years they used to post all the employees of the railways on in government's votes and proceedings initially, and then later on the Government Gazette. Now what's good about that is that you can now look in Trove and then search for these sorts of things and find your people on lists. And what's interesting is because it's every 3 years, you can work out what they were doing and where they were based every 3 years by doing this. And in a sense, that's just as good as a history card, because that's really what you're getting with a history card is a sequence of events. This happened before this, happened before this. So I strongly recommend researching this way, and since it went on Trove, you can do it from the comfort of your own home after the webinar. An example from Tramway. You can see there's 2 styles, isn't there? You know, there's the full history card and there's this, which is just a smaller one. And so it was really down to the agency what kinds of information they wanted to store on people. Government Printing Office. This follows the traditional pattern, doesn't it? Interesting, he's an engraver. started on probation. Corrective services. This is a register. It is slightly different to the records I've been showing you through this webinar to date, in the sense that a register is a line of information across the page with one line meaning one person. So you'll see on the left-hand side that his position, it might be a she. I look up and down, it doesn't seem to be very many. And you can see that the person there, you know, when he was appointed, in the room of, and so forth, the date of transfer, and the number of papers. Now, papers are hit and miss, but if there's correspondence of corrective services, it is probably going to be amongst them. And if that's something that you find a little daunting, that's okay, because you're about to transition into really advanced research. And if you come to the reading room, we can help you with that. That's, in a sense, my role today is webinar guide, but you get the advice of someone like myself or myself in the reading room. We can show you how to do very advanced things and make it very simple for you. More corrective services. This is a record of officers' services. Basic stuff here, isn't it? Hair colour, eyes, interesting. Didn't get that every time. Local council, a list of aldermen. Fire commissioners. Personal record books of the fire commissioners. This is more like a register, isn't it? So we're really seeing two styles of record now, the full history card and also the staffing register and salary register, which is very similar. Maritime Services Board, slightly different, isn't it? Unit was the Merchant Navy. That is almost certainly a British term. I think I'd have to look into that, but that's my understanding. We've got an occupation, date of birth. Really good at finding history out on the people you're interested in. And what's beauty of it is, it's even if it's not indexed online, which is, you know, makes it a little bit harder, it is going to be in some sense either alphabetical or indexed in the back room in original records. So it is actually, as long as you're flexible enough to find a way to research here, you can go either way on these sorts of things. Nurses Registration Act. One of the things about nurses and doctors, for example, who are not really a strong focus of today's webinar, but if they did work, if depending on who they work for, of course, but they had to register to be qualified to do that sort of thing, and we have lists of that sort of thing. You can see in the remarks here that she's been registered under that section of the Act. What's clear, what you would find interesting is when she or he was registered. Yeah, a little bit clearer, but same sort of thing. Mental hospital staff. If you were to look through the whole collection by mental hospital, you know, Parramatta just being an example, they don't have an awful lot of staff registers and that kind of thing. So this is a really good find. But there are for some. So that's going to be hit and miss depending on what your research is. But notice that it does the same sort of job as a general index, a general history card, but only a one-off, like a, you know, for this year only or for that period only. Electricity. One of the weaknesses when I was looking for an example of this one was that they drift into the closed period far too quickly, and I had to pick one that was completely open. So that series goes for quite a distance. And always remember, if ever you have you want to gain access to a closed record, you actually can ask to have access, and so you'd have to contact the agency that's responsible for those records today. For that kind of thing, I'd recommend contacting an archivist here, because it is a little fiddly sometimes to know when the agency's changed or the responsibilities changed, who is actually responsible now. So I'd ask for an expert for that kind of thing. But once you know who the agency is to contact, they're in a position to say yes or no. And as you know, for family history purposes, these sorts of things can be made open. And I don't see any reason why staff cards would be closed, because there's nothing sensitive about them, particularly for family history. So we'll leave that for a future time. It's not in the purview of today's webinar. But if ever you get to a block, call us or email us and we will assist you with how to go forward. Here's an example from Maritime Services in a special bundle. Special bundles are correspondence collected by the agency, but essentially they used to group them by what they're about. And so, but special bundles are nearly always worth looking in. And if you look on our website and start looking at special bundles, you'll notice that they can be quite fascinating for historians. For example, there's a handful on giving blankets to Aborigines, and there's a handful on things like the female factory at Parramatta and the fire at Fremont and the riot at Female Factory, and so on and so on and so forth. But that's for a future webinar. I'm just giving you the power to choose. Next one is a teacher career card. I did actually mention this earlier in the webinar, but I chose to leave the example for now. But you can see that it fits the format of the general career cards in terms of giving you a potted history going down the page. Something that's interesting, a side note, is that a lot of females were expected to resign when they got married, and a certain time it was expected, and so you can actually notice and find out side things. So maybe she got married this time. Oh, in this case, I happen to know her next spot. I believe she went on to a different profession, into becoming a doctor. Another one, teacher career card. I didn't want to give you a little sense of different things. Resignation accepted. Oh, look at that. There's an example of what I was just hinting at. Was she married when she resigned? Perhaps not. 1917. Well, I'll leave that for the person who's researching that one. I will keep going. George Bailey, teacher career card still. They'd like using a stamp in this period. Something that's interesting about teachers, if you look in school files, in general, school files by school name will have information in essentially is correspondence going from to the department and collected from about that particular school. Now, in general, a rule of thumb is that the larger the school, the less personal information you will find. It'll be more administrative, but the smaller the school, that reverse is the case. And I have seen some fascinating information about individual teachers in school files, generally speaking, the smaller schools, and everything from complaints being dealt with all the way through to I need a horse because I'm teaching in 3 places. Records of teachers and officers in the AIF in World War I. This is a very unusual record, but I put it in for today for experience because it's the kind of thing you can start to look in or find. I hope you find it inspirational. Police have this format. You can see it from era to era to era, and it does give you the information that you need, okay, when they were promoted to different levels, and it gives you the information of what they looked like, the hair color, their previous calling, and the district they were serving in. Another interesting thing about the police career cards is that they, generally speaking, are not one page. They can they can oftentimes go to 3 to 4 pages. So you get a bundle. If you ever were to call an archivist and weren't sure if someone was in this series, we could actually go and have a look for you because it's actually very quick to do. And here we know where they were serving. So you get a sense of where they were. Yeah, here's another one, a bit more information. Stopping a runaway horse in Pitt Street of the city at 10:25 a.m. I'd like to have seen that. Volunteer for service in South Africa. Oh, there we go. Notice that's an interesting little side note. He went to South Africa in the Boer War. Right away, we have reason to look in some of our other records because we do have a small series on Boer War records. Don't want to oversell that, but it's an example of where once you start finding information, it's like unthreading the wool of a jumper. It starts to unravel, and you get lots more information coming out. I won't keep going, but I do find that one interesting. So it brings me back to the main page, and for information, now I know a webinar can be quite a lot of information to take in all at once, but don't forget you've got lots of options to consolidate your learning today. The first one I'm going to recommend is to go back to Research A to Z. You can see it in 2 spots. Whenever you want to look for information, I've already shown you the guides, okay? Now, another thing is, don't forget, we're full access services here at Kingswood, and I'm one of the people who do this, and so are several of my colleagues. We answer the telephone at that phone number there. We answer emails. Now, the thing about emails is it's a 20-day turnaround. It's just that we get so many, and in general, an email question is going to be more complicated, and what we will give you in the end is worth the time and the wait. So what we will do is professionally go through the organization, work out what the right tools are for your particular question or series of questions, and then give you advice. So it's invaluable in the sense of You don't need to become the expert. If you get lost, you can ask us for help. I'd recommend the email if you've got a complicated question such as my family history this or my family history that. But if you've got a specific question in mind, ring us. And if you ring us, we can answer it either way. So in a sense, we can give you the expertise you need. For people who are in remote areas or people who feel they can't travel to the reading room, and some of our research is not going to be with online indexes that lead to copy services, you can contact professional researchers from one of those agencies there. They all maintain lists. One of the things I can say to give you a little bit of encouragement is that today's topic is not a long and lengthy research in general, because you can go through to pay dirt very quickly in the reading room. Now that brings me very close to the end of today's webinar on but I just wanted to give you a heads up that I actually did a previous webinar on a similar subject. Today was tracing government employees, and so my focus was really if they work for a government agency. I've also done an earlier one last year on New South Wales occupations, where I touched on government agencies, but I also went further into things like doctors' records and registrations to do things such as hawking goods and so forth, all sorts of wide variety of occupations. So if it turns out you think your person didn't work for the government, but may be a government record somewhere else, have a look at that webinar and it will open up the other options for you as well. So we are now closing down on the webinar. I sincerely hope you learned a lot today. I tried to give you not just a list of things to go and check, because that kind of approach would have taken me several days to complete. But what I did do is I tried to unlock the door for you so that you're encouraged to open it up and come on through. And I hope I showed you that today's search tools on our website is a very powerful way to find things. And so don't forget, tweak your results is the way to filter down to what you're looking for. And always remember, you can find things online in online indexes, and obviously that is a good thing, but there are going to be records that are not indexed, and they're not indexed online, but they're still available if you can find a way to do research at Kingswood. So no matter where your research goes, no matter what kind of things you find, I hope you find what you're looking for, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.